There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from living in a body that refuses to stay put. We talk about chronic illness like it's a destination. You get sick, you reach a baseline, you stay there. But the reality for people dealing with adrenal insufficiency is that the baseline is always moving.
Always. It's a moving target, and you're trying to hit it while blindfolded. I was reading this piece from My Adrenal Life. It focuses on the long-term use of fludrocortisone. And what immediately stood out to me wasn't just the pharmacology, though we need to get into that. It was the way it captured the sheer unpredictability of fluid and electrolyte balance. The body is sending mixed signals. One day you feel steady, grounded. The next day you stand up and the room tilts, and there's no obvious trigger. Right. We demand a mechanical explanation for an organic problem. The human body, especially the endocrine system, is not a thermostat. You don't just set it to 70 degrees and walk away. For people with primary adrenal insufficiency, Addison's disease, the system that naturally regulates sodium, potassium, and blood volume is fundamentally broken. The adrenal glands aren't making aldosterone, so they take fludrocortisone to replace it. But fludrocortisone is a static pill, and the body's demands are entirely dynamic.
We need to separate cortisol and aldosterone early on. Most people hear adrenal and immediately think of stress, energy, fight or flight. They think of cortisol.
Which makes sense. Cortisol gets all the press. Cortisol handles metabolism, the immune response, the acute stress reaction. But aldosterone is the plumber. It manages the pipes. In a healthy body, aldosterone tells the kidneys to hold on to sodium. Where sodium goes, water follows. That keeps blood volume up. It also tells the kidneys to excrete potassium. It's a delicate, microscopic balancing act happening thousands of times a day. When you lose that hormone, you lose the ability to keep fluid in your blood vessels.
You just leak volume.
Exactly. You pee out your salt, you pee out your water, and your blood pressure plummets. Fludrocortisone is the synthetic stand-in for aldosterone. It tries to mimic that sodium-retaining, potassium-excreting action, but it's a blunt instrument compared to the body's natural renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS. The RAAS is this elegant, multi-layered feedback loop that reacts instantly to you standing up or going out into the heat or fighting off a cold.
So someone takes their 0.1 milligrams of fludrocortisone in the morning. For the next 24 hours, they have a fixed amount of synthetic hormone trying to do the job of a system that normally adjusts minute by minute.
That's the structural problem, and it explains the quiet frustration the article talks about. What felt perfectly adequate on a Tuesday, sitting at a desk, might be completely insufficient on a Thursday when you're walking through a hot parking lot or fighting off a sinus infection. The need changes, but the prescription doesn't. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism actually suggests a lot of patients with primary adrenal insufficiency are chronically under-replaced with fludrocortisone. They live with persistent salt cravings and postural dizziness because the standard dosing just doesn't cover their actual physiological requirements.
Let's sit with that under-replacement issue. If patients are chronically dizzy, if they're craving salt, which is essentially the body screaming for volume, why aren't we just increasing the dose?
Because endocrinology has a deep-seated fear of hypertension, and not without reason. Fludrocortisone is potent. Over-replace it, and you cause the body to hold on to too much sodium and water. Blood pressure spikes. Potassium drops dangerously low, a condition called hypokalemia. You risk cardiovascular complications. So the traditional medical approach has been highly conservative. Aim for normotension, keep the blood pressure from getting too high, and if the patient feels a little dizzy upon standing, well, that's just the cost of doing business.
I'm not sure that holds up from a patient perspective. You're trading a hypothetical future cardiovascular event for guaranteed daily misery.
I understand the frustration, but it's not purely hypothetical. We know from cross-sectional studies that patients with primary adrenal insufficiency have an altered cardiovascular risk profile. Their RAAS is often highly upregulated even when they are on replacement therapy. That means the body is constantly churning out renin and angiotensin II, trying to stimulate the missing aldosterone. Angiotensin II is inflammatory. It promotes arterial stiffness. So the doctor is looking at a complex matrix of long-term vascular health, while the patient is just trying to walk up a flight of stairs without blacking out. It's a collision of priorities.
But wait, if the RAAS is upregulated, if renin is high, doesn't that objectively prove the patient needs more volume support? The body is literally signaling a deficit.
It does signal a deficit, but interpreting renin isn't a simple math equation. Doctors test plasma renin activity to guide fludrocortisone dosing. The goal is usually to keep renin in the upper half of the normal range. But here is where the disconnect happens, and the My Adrenal Life article hits this perfectly. A renin lab draw is a snapshot. It tells you what the system was doing at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday while the patient was sitting quietly in a phlebotomy chair.
It doesn't tell you what happened at 3 p.m. when they were chasing a toddler.
Exactly. Fluid regulation changes throughout the day. It responds to posture, to environmental heat, to stress. So the doctor looks at the lab report, sees renin and electrolytes right in the sweet spot and says, "You're perfectly replaced." Meanwhile, the patient is experiencing profound physical instability. They have fluid shifts, mild swelling one day, severe dehydration the next. Their labs look stable, but their life feels anything but stable. And when a patient reports those symptoms and the labs don't back them up, the patient often feels dismissed.
That's a structural failure in how we practice medicine. We treat the biomarker, not the human.
We do, because biomarkers give us the illusion of control. But the reality of fluid and electrolyte balance in adrenal insufficiency is that symptoms do not always align with lab values. The article makes this explicit. Fatigue in this context isn't just being tired. It feels like physical instability. It's a heaviness, a sense that the blood isn't quite reaching the brain. And that kind of fatigue can fluctuate wildly based on how much you sweat, what you ate, or whether you had a minor physiological stressor.
There's a distinction we need to make here between primary adrenal insufficiency, Addison's, and secondary or tertiary forms, because fludrocortisone isn't universally required.
Right, and this is a crucial biological nuance. In primary adrenal insufficiency, the adrenal cortex itself is destroyed. It cannot produce cortisol, and it cannot produce aldosterone, so both must be replaced. But secondary adrenal insufficiency is a pituitary issue. The pituitary gland stops producing ACTH, which signals the adrenals to make cortisol, so you lose cortisol. But, and this is the vital part, aldosterone production is mostly controlled by the RAAS, not by ACTH.
So the kidney-adrenal connection remains intact.
Largely, yes. In secondary or tertiary forms or steroid-induced insufficiency, the renin-angiotensin system can still prompt the adrenal glands to secrete aldosterone. So those patients typically don't need fludrocortisone. Their bodies can still manage sodium and water retention automatically. Now, the article notes that aspects of fluid balance may still be relevant depending on individual physiology, but the acute absence of aldosterone is really the hallmark of the primary form.
It makes the management of primaries so much more brittle. You are essentially manually operating a system that was designed to be fully automated.
You are flying a plane manually that was designed for autopilot, and you are doing it with delayed instruments. Think about how the body naturally responds to heat. You go outside on a summer day, you start to sweat. You're losing sodium and water. Instantly, your kidneys sense the drop in volume. They release renin. Renin converts to angiotensin, which triggers the adrenals to release a surge of aldosterone. The aldosterone tells the kidneys to clamp down and hold on to whatever sodium is left. Your blood pressure stays stable. All of this happens without you ever thinking about it.
But for the person with Addison's, that entire sequence is dead.
Dead. They sweat, they lose sodium, they lose volume, and the kidneys scream for help by releasing renin, but the adrenals are silent. There is no aldosterone surge. So the kidneys just keep dumping sodium. The blood pressure drops. The patient gets dizzy, nauseous, profoundly fatigued, and the only tool they have is a fixed dose of fludrocortisone. They took 8 hours ago. Some patients adapt by consuming massive amounts of salt during heat waves to manually force the volume back up, but it requires hypervigilance.
I want to circle back to the emotional toll. The article mentions confusion, frustration, feeling dismissed. That has to compound over years of treatment.
It creates a profound sense of isolation. When you have a chronic illness, you want to believe that if you follow the rules, you will get a predictable outcome. You take the meds, you eat right, you get sleep, you feel better. But fludrocortisone doesn't always play by those rules. You can do everything right and still have a day where your body just feels completely off. And when you take that to a doctor and the doctor says, well, your sodium is 140 and your potassium is 4.0, so you're fine, it creates a dissonance.
It's medical gaslighting, whether intentional or not.
It's a failure of our diagnostic paradigm. We place absolute faith in a localized blood draw over the patient's lived continuous experience. The article from My Adrenal Life suggests a shift in mindset for patients, moving away from expecting perfect consistency and toward noticing patterns, recognizing that variability is a baked-in feature of the condition, not a personal failure.
I don't know. That feels too clean to me. Telling a patient to allow for flexibility or adjust expectations, that sounds suspiciously like telling sick people to just lower their expectations and accept feeling terrible.
I see why it reads that way, but I think the distinction is between resignation and strategic adaptation. It isn't about accepting misery. It's about rejecting the false promise of perfect stability. If you believe your body should feel the same every single day on fludrocortisone, every bad day becomes a crisis to be solved. You drive yourself crazy asking, what did I do wrong? The flexibility the article is talking about is dropping the self-blame. It's shifting the question from what is wrong with me to what is my body reacting to right now?
It's moving from judgment to observation.
Exactly. Observation gives you data. Oh, I feel that specific kind of dizziness today. Did I sleep poorly? Is a storm front moving in? Am I fighting a virus? You begin to learn your own unique triggers. You learn what your personal baseline looks like rather than comparing yourself to a textbook definition of managed Addison's disease. And that allows for practical interventions, like energy pacing.
Energy pacing, the idea of leaving space between activities.
Right. Budgeting your physiological resources. If you know that hot weather drains your volume faster and you know your fludrocortisone dose is static, you have to manually adjust your output. You don't schedule a heavily demanding physical task in the afternoon. You allow for recovery time. You manage the environment. The article suggests things like shifting to lower demand activities when steadiness feels reduced, or creating a quieter, more supportive environment.
Which requires an immense amount of privilege. Let's be honest. Not everyone can just pause their day or shift to a lower demand activity because their electrolytes are shifting.
That's a very real structural limitation. The ability to pace yourself assumes you have control over your schedule, your employment, your caregiving responsibilities. For a lot of people, pausing isn't an option. They have to push through the instability, which often leads to a deeper crash later. The body will eventually collect on the physiological debt, but even within constrained circumstances, the internal shift, the removal of the self-blame has value. Acknowledging the frustration of not always having clear answers is in itself a form of coping.
It's unburdening yourself from the expectation of being a good, compliant, perfectly fixed patient.
Precisely. The medical system wants you to be fixed. It wants the lab values to reflect a cure or at least perfect management. But long-term use of fludrocortisone is an ongoing negotiation with a dynamic system. You are replacing one piece of a vastly complex puzzle. A sense of stability can take shape over time, but it looks more like learning how to ride a wave than learning how to build a wall. You develop a steadier understanding of how your body responds.
You stop fighting the variability and start anticipating it.
Anticipating it, accommodating it, and finding grace for the days when the system just doesn't work right. That's the real work of living long-term with primary adrenal insufficiency. It isn't just taking the pill. It's learning the language of a body that is constantly revising its own rules.
Which leaves us in a complex place. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the pharmacological realities of replacing aldosterone to the deep disconnect between lab values and lived experience to the emotional weight of managing a moving target.
And the fact that there isn't a clean resolution to this.
Right.
Medical science hasn't given us a dynamic replacement for the RAAS yet. Until it does, patients are doing the heavy lifting themselves. They are the ones navigating the trade-offs every single day. I think the framework provided by the My Adrenal Life article is vital because it validates the messy, inconsistent reality of that experience.
It gives people permission to stop looking for the missing piece of the puzzle and just look at the picture they actually have.
Right. It honors the struggle. If you are navigating this, reading the full article is absolutely worth your time. You can find it by going to the My Adrenal Life Facebook group, join the conversation there, and share your own experiences. The community aspect of this is often where the real understanding begins.